So here's a pretty bizarre story from over the weekend. Militarized cops at tiny Georgia neo-Nazi rally arrest counter-protesters for wearing masks. They cited a state law from the 1950s that was initially intended to go after hooded KKK members. How ironic is that? They say a heavily militarized police force of some 400 officers aggressively patrolled a small neo-Nazi rally in this city 40 miles southwest of Atlanta on Saturday and arrested about 100 counter-protesters, many for the crime of wearing a mask. Police officers arrived before the rally began and approached a group of about 50 anti-fascist protesters. They demanded the protesters remove their masks or face arrest. The officers, who wore bulletproof vests and helmets and carried semi-automatic rifles, cornered the anti-fascist protesters, then grabbed those who were still masked, tossing them to the ground and handcuffing them. At one point, an officer pointed what seemed to be a modified AR-15 at the faces of counter-protesters, none of whom appeared to be armed. The lead officer in the arrests said the counter-protesters were breaking a state law regarding masks, likely referring to a seldom enforced 1951 law aimed at combating hooded Ku Klux Klan members. Anti-fascist protesters, many belonging to chapters of Antifa groups known for sometimes violently confronting white supremacists, often wear masks to avoid being identified by both law enforcement and neo-Nazis. So that's actually perfectly reasonable. You definitely don't want to, if you're an anti-fascist protester, you don't want to be recognized by Nazis, because then, these guys will have message boards and they go and they spread the identities of people who are against them, and sometimes they take action. This isn't a joke. Those people are seriously violent people. They have a violent ideology. So what's fascinating is usually the cops, to be fair, actually do a decent job at these kinds of protests where they kind of let whoever the hateful people are that are spreading their message, they're legally allowed to spread that message. That's part of living in a country that's free and you have free speech. So they let them spread their hateful messages, but also they let the counter-protesters counter-protest, and there's no problem with that. This is a rare instance where the cops genuinely seem to be biased. Because if you want to go after for some sort of technicality, I'm sure you could go after anybody for some sort of technicality. Hey, the guys who are the fucking white supremacist protesters, you're not in the exact designated area where you have the permit to protest, so I'm going to arrest you. Oh, this guy just fucking jaywalked on his way to the protest. I'm going to come after this guy. There's a million ways. If you wanted to nitpick, you can nitpick, But they didn't choose to nitpick the white supremacists. They chose to nitpick the anti-fascist protesters and said, you're covering your face, now I'm going to arrest you. So, hey man, listen, maybe an investigation is needed into the police department in this particular town, because oftentimes, and this might sound conspiratorial, but it's not, some police departments have officers that harbor sympathies towards white supremacists. It's been proven in the past. We've covered stories on it in the past. Wouldn't we want to make sure? Because listen, I don't want to smear all cops, because like I said, in many of these counter-protest situations, the cops do a great job and they understand free speech rights. When the Westboro Baptist Church used to go to the funerals of gay soldiers or funerals of soldiers or whatever and say, this is a blessing that these people died, the cops did the right thing and they kept the peace and they didn't, try to shut down the protests or anything like that. So I've seen them do a good job. But this is an instance where if they're going after anti-fascist protesters simply for wearing masks and they're citing some obscure bullshit law, no. You need to stand up for the free speech rights of everybody. Not just the bigoted assholes, but also the people who are saying, hey, I disagree with the bigoted assholes. Free speech matters on both sides there.